Hello everybody and welcome to Ag with Ellis. I'm Mr. Ellis, and here today we're going to be doing a little bit of a special episode. We've got this practice class presented to you by Virginia Tech in partnership with the Hordes Dairymen that we're going to be looking at. This class we're going to be doing reasons over. We're going to pretend like this is a reasons class in your dairy cattle evaluation competition. So what does that mean? The first thing we got to do with every class is figure out the correct alignment and placing of those animals numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you haven't learned how I typically teach the kids to do that, there's other videos in this same playlist that will help teach you those things. Excuse me. But today we're going to be doing that first, and then we're going to be using those notes. And as you can see, I'll just create a new doc here. As you can see, we are going to Ayrshire class notes. We're going to place this class, and then we're going to create a sample set of reasons notes. So the first thing I like to do whenever we come up to a class, as you've probably seen, is come up with the class name and what my placing of it is. This will help you remember what the notes actually go to. Okay. And this is to help us place the class. We got to do that before we can really start formulating a set of reasons. There's two main ways that I've seen it done. I'm going to be covering how to write a set out kind of paragraph by paragraph, word for word. Let's go figure out what that class name is. It looks like it's Ayrshire 4-year-olds. Okay. Alright, let's start looking at this class here. Let's skip to number 1. We can see we've got a pretty decent cow here. She looks to be wide in her hooks and pins, or at least wide enough for the breed. And that was cow number 1. So wide in hooks and pins. This is just a general census for us to go by on what our placing is. You get about 15 minutes to place and start writing your notes on a reasons class. So we're going to want to come up with our placing fairly quick so we can start writing out our reasons in paragraph form, which will help us figure out the exact way we need to say them. She could have more spring to her rib, and that's a down arrow. This would be an up arrow. Okay. We're on number 2. She's got a lot of rib. Holy cow. We'll mark that down. I want to go back to 1 real quick because we didn't really take any notes on the actual udder itself. Lots of rib. That is a plus. Then let's go back here. Let's look at the udder. Good foreudder attachment. Good veining. Good cleft. Decent sized teats. Not too big, not too small. She's well attached. Good veining. I misspelled the heck out of that. There we go. It's close enough. Now let's go on to cow number 2. She's really big in this midsection. Nice capacious midsection, which we kind of said that with rib, but capacious midsection. If I really had to get down to the nitty-gritty of it, I would say she's maybe just a touch. And whenever I say a touch, I'm talking like fractions of over-conditioned. And it might just be because of the pictures and the fact that she is a white, primarily white Ayrshire. Actually, while we're on the topic of that, she is the most white in this class. You could probably say that she's the primarily white Ayrshire. She is a touch over conditioned. But she is wider than number 1 in her hooks and her pins. Wider than number 1 in hooks and pins. The reason why I'm specifying there is because I already said this one was wide in the hooks and pins. If I'm looking at this later on and it says wide in hooks and pins and I just write wide in hooks and pins for this one too, then I'm going to be confused, I'm going to have to take extra time to go back and look which one was wider if it comes down to a decision between the two. She's very feminine, which usually if they're a touch over conditioned, you could see them be not as feminine, but she doesn't do that. Nice and angular. She's angular, and we can talk about the udder floor. So she's angular, could be more level from rear to front teats. That's a lot of notes on that one. Let's go ahead and go on to number 3. Okay. So I'm seeing this one right now. Probably the largest uddered cow in the class as soon as we get to skip past this advertisement. Number 3 is probably the largest uddered cow in the class. So I'm going to put that she has the most capacious udder in the class. However, this leads to a bad fore-udder attachment. So although that's a plus for having a big udder, that is ultimately going to be a down arrow, because you can see she doesn't blend well in her fore-udder attachment. Her rear udder attachment doesn't look bad. She's surprisingly well attached in the rear udder. Lots of veining. Most veining. And I spelt it wrong again. I have trouble with that word today. And she could be a little deeper in the heart girth. Could be deeper in her heart girth. And what I mean by that is the depth from the top of the withers up here to ultimately the bottom of her rib cage and right behind this front shoulder. This is the heart girth area. That's what I'm talking about whenever we look at that. And then I said she was surprisingly well attached in the rear udder. And that's an up arrow. Up arrows mean good, down arrows mean bad. Moving on to number 4, she looks a little sluggish in the head. Again, could be deeper in the heart girth, but what we're really going to want to focus on here is this udder. The udder here, she's not got the best udder floor. Worst udder floor. Big down arrow. Roached top line. She roaches in her top line. You can see that there. And that's partially due to the angle from hooks to pins. She blends a little bit in the fore-udder attachment. I don't really want to talk about that with this one too much. And she has the worst veining. Let's see if I can get that word right now. I mean, she's not got the best rib in the class, and she appears to lack dairy character. Worst in dairy character. Okay. And if we start looking at this, I can start coming up with a placing. And I didn't have a whole lot of notes on 1. I had a lot of notes on 2. I said she had lots of rib. She had a good midsection. She was a touch over condition. And she could be more level from her rear to front teats. But she was wider than number 1 on the hooks and pins. I'm going to give her an up arrow overall. That's why I'm putting it next to her number over here. And that's just helping me figure out where I need to place them. This one I had a lot of bad notes for. Down arrow. Okay? That's telling me this one has to sort into the top pair. This one has to sort into the bottom pair. And I'm going to go ahead and mark number 4 as last place. Now let's look here. Are either 1 and 3 better than number 2? Based off of my notes here, I would say no. Number 2 kind of takes the edge in her hip structure over number 1. I'm going to move her up into the top. Let's look at 1 and 3. What do we want to emphasize between the two? As I start comparing them, over top they look very similar. This one's maybe a touch more conditioned over her top line. She is wider in her rear attachment. This one appears to be more narrow in her rear attachment. As we look at them from even further low, I can see that this one has a smaller udder, not as capacious. However, she is strongly attached based off of her udder floor placement. And what I mean by that is the floor of the udder, where the teats are, above the hock, which is this ball-looking joint right here in the rear leg. This one appears to be at that line. This one appears to be a little stronger, even though she has the narrower rear udder attachment. So that's a plus to number 1. They're similar on rib. There's not too much of a distinction there. You know, if I look at 1 and 3 in comparison to our class winner number 2, there's a big difference. But when looking at them right here, this one's presenting a little more of her side, and I think it's just the angle at which she's standing there. They're similar in width of their feet. They both kind of toe out a little bit in the front. As I look at them, this middle pair here, I just like how her udder is comprised more. This one doesn't blend as well in that 4 udder attachment, so I think I'm going to go 1-3. Now, I didn't write all that stuff down, but those are all things that we're going to want to say and reasons, right? So someone knows why we placed it that way. And this is just a very basic way on how to place a class. So I have 2, 1, 3, 4. In a competition, I'm not going to get to be able to peek ahead, but let's peek ahead here and see what the professionals at Virginia Tech said when it comes to this class's placement. And let's see how close we were. I just did it very quickly on gut feeling, but let's go and see. They said 2, 1, 3, 4. We said 2, 1, 3, 4. Hey, we got the 50. Now, where I do think that you could start, they have the lowest cut in the top pair. It does get a little close up there. I don't think it's as close as the middle pair. But the way they sort, I kind of agree with the middle cut of a 4. You kind of have to find 3 and 4 into the bottom. And I definitely agree with this 5 cut here in the bottom pair between 3 and 4. 4 is definitely worse than 3 by a pretty good margin. So even if we flip that top pair, we're not going to get hurt too bad. I'd take a 47 out of 50 any day of the week. But fortunately for us today, we got it right. They said when we talk about 2 over 1, 2 was the bigger ribbed. Completely agree there. Deeper and more spring. She was sharper in her top line. I can see that. Being the bigger framed cow, she definitely holds up in terms of sharpness. Let's look at the middle pair here. 1 over 3, this is where I think it gets closer. And, yeah, they talk a little bit about the 4 udder attachments of these 2 cows. Which one was longer bodied? I didn't even look at that. and they looked at their pasterns and their set to their hock. That's part of the reason why they liked 1 better than 3. And then 3/4, they liked the strong top that 3 presented in comparison to 4s. I'll agree there. Less roached, yep, for sure. Let's see, higher and wider rear udder attachment, yep, for sure. When they talk about that rear udder attachment right here, this one's higher up the back, closer to the back, sorry, and wider than number 4's. You can really see that here. They said deeper frame, but other problems presented, yep. That's fair. Okay. We've done that. We've placed our class. That took us coming up on 16 minutes. Okay. Now, I was explaining things, so it probably didn't take us that long. It probably took us about 10 minutes to get all these notes. But if I go in there with just these notes, and I try to give a set of reasons, this is going to feel very choppy. It's not going to have much explanation to it, and ultimately, it's not going to do as great. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use a little bit of that pair system that they use to cut the class to our advantage. We have a top pair of 2 and 1, a middle pair of 1 and 3, and a bottom pair of 3 and 4. And that's the way we're going to want to talk them, because that's the way we placed the class, right? We were comparing them, we were looking at them as individuals, so on and so forth. So you can see here we have our class name, 4-year-old Ayrshire, and our placing was 2, 1, 3, 4. Yep. Intro. This is something not a whole lot of people do. I think you should always lead off with a brief intro. You know, and to fill in the gaps here, we're gonna say, in this class of 4-year-old Ayrshires, my preferred alignment is 2, 1, 3, 4. In this class, I saw an easy class winner in the primarily white Ayrshire number 2. I then noticed a pretty competitive middle pair between the primarily brown cows of 1 and 3. To round out the class, this led me to round out the class, that's a better way to say it, with the number 4 cow. Okay. This is a brief intro, and the way you would say this is, in this class of 4-year-old Ayrshires, my preferred alignment is 2, 1, 3, 4. In this class, I saw an easy class winner in the primarily white Ayrshire number 2. I then noticed a pretty competitive middle pair between the primarily brown cows of 1 and 3. And ultimately, this led me to round out the class with the number 4 cow. In our, let's say, in the top pair, I led with number 2. In the top pair, I led with number 2. She, and then here we go. We can start looking at number 2. She was the standout in the class because of these reasons, right? So I'm going to start saying that. In the top pair, I led with number 2. She bolstered herself with a very capacious midsection in the most spring of rib in this class. She also accompanied this by having a strongly attached udder with desirable veining. Okay? That's a pretty good description of a cow right there. You can see why I placed her in first. Our description of first place. Now we need to tell that judge why we ended up using her as first place over the second place cow, which was number 1. And this is what we're going to do here. We're going to do a grant always to start off our why did this place beat this place. What is a grant? A grant is something that you say about the lower placing cow in that pair that they had that was better than the one that you chose to win the pair. So an example of a grant here, you can see in my notes. I said she could be more level from her rear to front teats, okay, and that she was a touch over conditioned. If I go back to the class and I look at 2 and 1, what does 1 have that is better than number 2? Well, I would say that number 1 was a touch more correctly conditioned. So if I think that, I should just say it. Now, I'll admit this is a good transitionary phrase to use. I end up banking on this one just about every time I do it. With these transitionary phrases, you're not going to want to use them more than once if you can avoid it. Now, I'll admit that the number 1 cow had number 2 beat slightly. It wasn't a big difference in terms of overall conditioning. But number 2 puts more good things together and ultimately won the class due to having a wider set to her hooks and pins than number 1. Okay, and now you can start seeing the set of reasons come together. Let me correct that. In this class of 4-year-old Ayrshires, my preferred alignment is 2-1-3-4. In this class, I saw an easy class winner in the primarily white Ayrshire number 2. I then noticed a pretty competitive middle pair between the primarily brown cows of 1 and 3. And this ultimately led me to round out the class with number 4. In the top pair, I led with number 2, as she bolstered herself with a very capacious midsection and the most spring of rib in this class. She also accompanied this by having a strongly attached udder with desirable veining. Now, I'll admit that the number 1 cow had number 2 beat slightly in terms of overall conditioning, but number 2 puts more good things together and ultimately won the class due to having a wider set to her hooks and pins than number 1. And you can see that sounded very good. That was only about a third of our class. Okay? I asked the students to try and remember 100% of their reasons. My students are not allowed to use their notes and read off their notes. In a dairy cattle judging competition, if you read off of your notes that we're creating right here, you're pretty much automatically only going to be able to score 25 of the 50 points. And in a competition like this where we're wanting to go and win, that's not good enough. We need our reasons to be, if we can, 45s or higher, even on classes that we don't place very good on. The way you place the class can make or break your set of reasons. As if I put number 4 first and I was talking about how good she was in her structure, I would be straight out lying to you. Okay? She wasn't good in her structure. And the reasons judge will most likely have also judged this class to help make the official placing, and they'll be familiar with what the class entails. So you don't want to be lying in your reasons, and you want your reasons to be as accurate as possible to what you saw. This is another reason why I think taking that first glance is the best way to judge a reasons class. Your gut is going to if you've been taught correctly, going to lead you in this one, okay? And at the end of the day, there will come a class where you forget. You get all the way through it, it's going perfect, boom. I get to my last pair, and I forget everything. It's happened to me. I've given probably thousands of dairy cattle reasons sets in my life, and between my livestock judging experiences and being an ag teacher, I've probably given, upwards of 2,000 to 4,000 different sets of reasons when I'm talking in class. But there's going to be a time where you forget. I forget. The students forget. You've got to be able to think on your feet and try and remember, what did that class have? Remember the cows in my head. If I get to my bottom pair here, I can talk about how in my bottom pair, the number 3 cow ended up in 3rd place for me today, simply because she was better put together. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I didn't like the overall structure or udder composition of the number 4 cow, and that's why she had to be 4th. Okay? That was a little off the cuff. That's just from what I remember. I don't have the class pulled up on a screen beside me, and I'm trying to, cheat the system here, and I'm not doing that. That's literally just what I remembered. And that's okay. If you don't remember your exact words, the worst thing that you could do is get stressed out, pause for a long time, and go and give a choppy set of reasons. At the end of the day, it's better to just go on and try to be as accurate as possible. You know what the judge is wanting to hear. So tell them. We're approaching on 27 minutes. I don't really know how much more of the video we have left here, but I'm going to try my best to finish out this class in terms of descriptions. Okay, so transitionary phrase. Moving on to our middle pair of predominantly brown Ayrshires. We have 1/3. There you go. If I could spell Ayrshires right, we would have a pretty good day here, wouldn't we? And let's go back to our notes. 1/3. A good thing to always say is, 1 followed best to our class winner because she also had a wide set to her hips, which will allow her to have an easier time in the calving process. Okay? Another really good thing to do is to explain why it's good for her to have a wide set to her hips. If a cow can't produce a calf, then she will not milk. And the best way for her to produce a calf is naturally. We want to have as little interference from a farmer or vet as we possibly can. So when I say 1 followed best to our class winner because she also had a wide set to her hips, which will allow her to have an easier time in the calving process. This means she is the easier keeping cow of the pair. What else did we say about her? Her udder was well attached and had good veining. Another good transition for a grant is now I can see that the number let's look at number 3 real quick and try to find a difference between the two, and I think it's going to be right here. Probably had her beat slightly in terms of overall capacity of the udder and in her rib. Okay, it's not by a big margin. I can see that the number 3 cow has number 1 beat slightly in terms of spring to her rib and overall udder capacity. I'm looking back to make sure I didn't use this transition that I'm about to throw out. At the end of the day, I will take the added femininity and upstanding frame that the number 1 cow presented to me today. Okay. Rounding out the class with our bottom pair, I saw an abrupt distinction between our 3rd place cow and our 4th place cow. 3 wins the bottom pair. Why did 3 win the bottom pair? Because she has the most capacious. Capacious just means big, by the way. Has a lot of room. Udder of the class. And is surprisingly well attached in her rear udder despite this. You might say that who was last? Number 4. That number 4 has number 3 beat. And this is where it can be hard to find a good thing that our last place cow has. But every cow has good, every cow has bad. So let's find the good here. What can we make of this cow? Between 1 and 3. That 4 udder attachment. There you go. You might say that number 4 has number 3 beat with her smoother 4 udder attachment. And you might have to get good at shorthand for this. 4 udder attachment, FUA. And you might sit there and be able to, remember, hey, this is what I write every time for 4 udder attachment. And not everybody's going to be able to read your set of reasons because you're going to use shorthand to try to eliminate that time consumption. You might say that number 4 has number 3 beat with her smoother 4 udder attachment. What I will tell you is that number 3 is the better cow overall because she is stronger in her top line. She has a better, more even set from hooks to pins, and the better overall udder composition. You want to try not to use the same terms over and over. However, composition. Okay, I forgot there was an extra O. That is why she is why she is third. Okay. And then we have a small description of fourth place. A lot of people decide to leave this out. I'm going to tell you to go ahead and describe that fourth place cow a little bit more, just because I think it helps round out the class better. Number 4 is number 4. How do I want to say this? Number 4 had the worst udder composition. I remembered the O this time, but I forgot some other stuff. Had the worst udder composition of our cows in class today, and the worst overall structure. To be specific, she is roached in her top line, which will not lead to her having the easiest time when traveling from feed to water. As we all know, dairy cows need lots of feed and water in order to give us the most and best quality of milk. These concerns lead me to place her fourth. And I always say round it out by saying thank you. Okay. We have a set of reasons. It took me a while to write that, right? So you're going to want to make sure you leave time at the end of the class, and maybe as you're transitioning from class to class, you write on your set of reasons. And maybe you get done placing the next class early, and you're still standing at a distance, but you can kind of see the cows. You have your notes. You can write a set of reasons that way. Use your time wisely. Okay? So if I'm going to read this out loud for you for the last time before I let you go, this is what I have. We're at 3:15 on the counter, so we can time ourselves here. Should be around 2 minutes. In this class of 4-year-old Ayrshires, my preferred alignment is 2-1-3-4. In this class, I saw an easy class winner with the primarily white Ayrshire number 2. I then noticed a pretty competitive middle pair between the primarily brown cows of 1-3. This led me to round out the class with the number 4 cow. In the top pair, I led with number 2, as she bolstered herself with a very capacious midsection and the most spring of rib in this class. She also accompanied this by having a strongly attached udder with desirable veining. Now I'll admit that the number 1 cow had the number 2 cow beat slightly in terms of overall conditioning, but number 2 puts the most good things together and ultimately won the class due to having a wider set to her hooks and pins than number 1. Moving on to our middle pair of predominantly brown Ayrshires, we have 1/3. 1 followed best to our class winner because she also had a wide set to her hips, which will allow her to have an easier time in the calving process. This means that she is the easier keeping cow of the pair. Her udder was well attached and had good veining. Now I can see that the number 3 cow has number 1 beat slightly in terms of spring to her rib and overall udder capacity, but at the end of the day, I will take the added femininity and upstanding frame that the number 1 cow presented to me today. Rounding out the class with our bottom pair, I saw an abrupt distinction between our third place cow and our fourth place cow. Number 3 wins the bottom pair because she has the most capacious udder of the class and is surprisingly well attached in her rear udder despite this. You might say that number 4 has number 3 beat with a smoother fore-udder attachment, but what I will tell you is that number 3 is the better cow overall. This is because she is stronger in her top line. She has a better and more even set from hooks to pins, and the better overall udder composition. That is why she is going to be third. Number 4 had the worst udder composition of our cows in class today, and the worst overall structure. To be specific, she is roached in her top line, which will not lead to her having the easiest time when traveling from feed to water. As we all know, dairy cows need a lot of feed and water in order to give us the most and best quality of milk. These concerns lead me to place her fourth. Thank you. And we're at 40:55. So, that was a little over 2 minutes. That's a pretty good set, okay? This set does have some problems. There was a couple spots where it got a little choppy, okay? There's a couple spots where I wrote it down, I added words or subtracted words. And so what I'm going to want to make sure whenever I'm studying this and trying to memorize is that if I'm adding words, maybe I go back and I erase it and I write it a different way. This is why we do it in pencil. Or instead of writing it a different way, maybe I just remember that I say it that way whenever I say this class, okay? Try to get it all the way memorized. That's all I can tell you. That's the best thing for you here. Okay? We're running out of time today. Thank you to Virginia Tech and the Hordes Dairymen for providing this class on YouTube. It'll be in the description. The link to the class will. Okay? This has been Ag with Ellis. I'm Mr. Ellis, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you.